Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and we are on the first of a new series about Norway in World War II. And we have a rip-roaring show about the O.S.S, Norwegian railways, and incredible bravery in subarctic conditions. My guest works at the Norwegian Armed Forces Museum. Welcome, Frode. I'll bring him in now. Good evening, sir. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
So we were just talking before going online about history in Norway and history generally in World War II, and what sort of readers, what sort of authors get their books in Norwegian bookstores, things like that. But you have a book on this operation, which is in the links below for folks if you want to buy the book. But how do you define yourself? Do you find yourself as a World War II historian, a general historian? Obviously, you work in a museum. You're also part of the Norwegian Home Guard. Do you have a label you like to give yourself?
Yeah, general military historian, because working at the museum means that you have to be a jack of all trades. So I have written books about early modern history and World War II, Cold War, and the whole range. Yeah.
Another quick question before we start is, what's the level of interest in Norway right now with World War II? Because the interesting thing talking to historians around the world is that there are different kind of places on the timeline. Britain seems to be obsessed with World War II, or certainly middle-aged men do, and it's the Spitfires, things like that. And other countries, France has been a bit slower to sort of look back at World War II. The Philippines, new interest there. China's starting to show interest. So Norway, where do you think the interest is? Because you obviously, the country was occupied in World War II. There were some pretty bleak and miserable times for the Norwegian people. But is it something that is talked about a lot?
Yeah, and every 5 years there's an anniversary. Because we were invaded in 1940, liberated in 45, so you kind of get 2 for 1. And if you go into the Norwegian bookstore and look under documentary history shelf, almost 2/3 of the titles are on World War II, and there's different subtopics. There's the resistance, there's more general history about the big operations and battles, and you also have kind of the more in academia you have a tendency towards reappraising old heroes, kind of trying to find more nuance to known stories. Sometimes historians, or rather journalists, kind of step out of bounds, for instance suggesting that there was that the resistance movement were rife with anti-Semitism that fired. So it's still going very strong interest for World War II in many ways. Yeah.
Well, that's good, because that's what we are a community of. So I'll bring up your slides. So folks, fire away with questions. I don't know how many of you out there in the audience know much about this one, but I'm pretty certain a lot of the questions will be answered during the presentation. But I'm going to hand over to my guest to take us through this. And and it kind of ties in with our shows we did earlier this year, in that it's about that spring of 1945, when perhaps people think there isn't much going on, but there's a lot going on globally. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks. My opening slide is a piece of artwork that was made for a previous book I wrote on railway sabotage. So this it kind of depicts the second attack done by Rype, which we will return to, and of course having artists in. There's all kind of booby traps, so to say. For instance, an engineer would quickly spot that the way the charges are placed are completely wrong, and so on. But I won't bother you with that. Those such details. So I'll try to begin with kind of drawing the big picture, the context in which Rype is taking place. So this is an operation that takes place at the end of World War II, and it's set in the central part of Scandinavia, in central Norway. I don't know if people see if I use the pointer like that.
Well, the pointer won't work, but you can kind of describe where you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's pretty much in the middle of Norway, just around the E in Norwegen, for those of you who can read the titles on the map. So the strategic setting is this. Finland switched sides in early September 1944, and that led to the German withdrawal from Finland and the northern parts of Norway. So these troops are in transit through Norway, which is logistically a nightmare because you have very few roads. They can't go to sea because the Allies are lurking outside the coast with their submarines, patrol aircraft. So they pretty much have to walk from Finland to Middle Norway. And this is called Operation Nordlicht, Operation Northern Lights. So this is an ongoing process all through the end of the war. And on the 16th of December, the Battle of the Bulge is opened, where the Germans try to make a last-ditch attempt at halting the Allies by punching through the lines, trying to reach Antwerp and all that. And this creates a kind of a panic or worries, at least among the Allies, that the Germans will withdraw from Norway and reinforce the offensive in Belgium. So this kind of sparks a series of special operations against the railway in Norway. And you may ask, why not just bomb the things? First, the Norwegian government was very reluctant to allow large-scale Allied bombing operations in Norway because of the risk of collateral damage. So, so you would have, so they would rely, or at any opportunity, suggest use special forces. So that's the kind of also the backdrop to the heavy water attacks. So you rather use small groups of dedicated saboteurs instead of flattening whole areas. And also finding the railway in the Norwegian outback is quite difficult because of all the snow and the terrain in general. So that's kind of the larger picture behind this. And at the end of the war, you know, difference in interests between the British and Americans kind of manifest itself. They're starting to think about the aftermath of the war. And so for the British, they kind of they see Scandinavia and Norway in particular as kind of their turf. It's the other side of the North Sea. And if any hostile force control the Norwegian coast, it's obviously a threat towards Norway. The threat towards Britain. The American interest is kind of it's not that it's non-existent, but it's kind of their idea of the post-World War. It's kind of more universal, kind of denying that spheres of interest even exist. And you also have Norwegian interest, which is kind of diverging from the general Allied line. So they're starting to think about getting a certain Norwegian sovereignty as quick as possible over this area. And any lengthy Allied presence in that matter is, of course, a problem. And the Norwegian government in London, exile government, weren't exactly thinking about the practical issues arising from getting all the Germans out, getting all their equipment secured, and dismantling the whole apparatus of occupation. So they just think that the sooner we get every foreign troops out of Norway, being allied or not, the better. And then you have the Swedish interest. So of course their interest all through the war or right up to the end has been just mainly to stay out of it, ensuring that Swedish interests are not hurt, and that the war simply doesn't spill over into Sweden. So right up to the last year of the war, they have been very reluctant allowing the Allies to use Swedish territory, Swedish airspace. But in the final year, they start to the Norwegian resistance are allowed to set up bases and depots on the Swedish side, and all this and a lot of these sabotage groups, they have their bases close to or even across the Swedish border. A little bit about the guys that did this operation. So they're commonly known as the Norwegian Special Operations Group. And note there's a difference between British and American naming, so that the British kind of doesn't distinguish between the name of the operation and the name of the group. So for instance, Woodlark means both the operation and the group that do the operation. But NORSO is the group and Rype is the operation. At the onset of World War II, America didn't have a strategic intelligence service, which is quite odd for a great power, but they kind of saw it as beneath them, as there was, I think, the foreign minister, I think it was, at the end of World War I, said something like, "A gentleman doesn't read another gentleman's mail." That was kind of the hype. So every kind of strategic intelligence they had during World War I was dismantled very quickly. But as World War as World War II kind of got closer, Americans kind of figure out we need to have a strategic intelligence. They already had, of course, the naval and army intelligence, and also you can kind of include the FBI, which had especially in in Latin America, it was kind of FBI's turf. So you get the formation of the O.S.S, and it kind of splits and merges in many different sub organizations, of which the special operations groups is only one. So you can say that for the most, the Americans, they were amateurs in intelligence, special operations, and that kind of stuff. But they had one advantage over pretty much everybody else, and that was the analytic part. So they were they staffed their intelligence service with scientists, researchers, journalists from all sorts of walks of life. So they were much more open-minded and using libraries and archives and so on to kind of analyze an area operation. So that was, in that they had a huge advantage. But once they put people on the ground, things were a bit different. So they were kind of, the NORSO was kind of a counterpart to the S.O.E. In many ways. Digging into this kind of set Europe ablaze kind of mindset. And the relations to the British were kind of ambiguous because, and it's too simplistic to say that there was a rivalry between the British and the American, which of course it was, but it was more of a rivalry between various allied services. For instance, the MI5 and the MI6 didn't work very well together. Everybody hated the S.O.E. and so on. And the NORSO actually probably cooperated much better with the S.O.E. than the S.O.E. cooperated with other British branches of special operations. So the whole idea behind these special operations groups for the American was to kind of utilize the reservoir, so to say, they had of people being native to areas where they needed to do special operations. So there were a Greek special operations group, there was a Filipino special operations group, and so on. And because their advantage vis-a-vis the British, for instance, they had a large pool of people who knew the language, knew the culture on which they could set up units. And of course, there was, they needed to have people who were versed in the current slang. For instance, if a guy emigrated from Norway, let's say 10, 15 years before the war broke out, he wouldn't be up to date on the current lingo, for instance. So this was kind of this cultural stuff that the Americans put very high emphasis on, kind of be sure that the people are blending in. And there's a famous scene in the movie Inglourious Bastards where this exactly they hold up this fingers, whereas a British he as a British he do this, well he was supposed to do this. Drei Gläser, bitte. So this is kind of the context that the Norwegian Special Operations Group kind of fall into. And this is also kind of a so the whole concept of special operations is kind of nascent in the beginning, so to say. So you have a blurred distinction between special forces and elite forces. Special forces doing strategic operations far into enemy territory, whereas elite forces only do what everybody else is doing, only better. So you'd have this kind of this is still kind of murky. So you'd also have the 99th Battalion, from which many of the men of the NORSO were drawn. So they were Norwegian Americans, also kind of into the concept of using native operators. But they were a elite force being deployed to northern France and Belgium in the campaign in Europe. But still, also you would have kind of the question, why did they kind of pick the Norwegians as a starting point of this concept? So there's numerous explanations, and I apologize if I sound a bit chauvinistic on this, because But it has very much to do about stereotypes and ideas about what Norwegians were, because there's a lot of things in this contemporary context here which kind of single out Norwegians as the archetype of special operations operators. So at this point, you would have had numerous polar expeditions, guys like Roald Amundsen, Nansen, and you would also have in sports, winter sports, for instance, in the Olympics in Chamonix in 1924, Norway took basically all gold medals. And you would also have a lot of anecdotes and stories from the frontier in America, guys skiing with a mail across the Rocky Mountains in the wintertime. And of course, you would have the cholera epidemic in Nome in Alaska in 1924, where there was a couple of Norwegian guys with dog sledge that were able to get the medicine into the city. And all this kind of build up the myth of Norwegians as superhumans, kind of, but if you look at the guys that actually made up this Norwegian Special Operations Group, they were mostly from the western and southern parts of Norway, where you had the least skiing traditions, actually, and they were mostly sailors. But they kind of, and some of them were quite accomplished skiers. At least a couple of them would have probably competed on a national level today. Yes. So some of you guys may pick up that I am used to present this as kind of a intelligence brief for if exercises. It's kind of have that structure. So you will have to talk about the German units in the area of operations, which is detailed on the map to the right. So this terrain is kind of, once you pass the area called the town of Steinkjer, the railway, which you see as a black line, runs through pretty remote areas, which makes it vulnerable to sabotage, because you can get all the way to the railway line without being detected by an enemy. So in this area, you would have a mix of territorial units, which is second, third tier of German troops, which is basically the bottom of the barrel next to the Volkssturm. But there would also be some elite units in transit, these German mountain troops that had been fighting in Finland. So they are somewhere in the area on the move. So these territorial units are from the 722nd Grenadier Regiment. So they have have responsibility for an area from where, if you can pick up the place name Majavatn, all the way down to just south of the place called Snåsa.
Right.
Yeah. So these are a mix of very young, very old people, poorly motivated. Also in this area, you would have a lot of infrastructure, huge ammo depots. You would have Soviet POWs working as slaves along the railway with repairs and chopping firewood and that kind of stuff. And you have a bulge jutting into Sweden, where you would have a patrol base, but a great concentration of German troops in this area is around Snåsa, where the main part of this regiment is located. So you see a shift in about the spring and summer 1944. The Germans are moving from from defense against invasions from the west towards being more concerned with the railway and possible incursions from Sweden.
Right.
And the funny thing is that what they fear is sabotage from communist groups, which is very rare in this area. Most of the resistance in this area is controlled by the Norwegian government in London. You would have small pockets of communist resistance, but not the big threat against the Germans. So it kind of tells you about how poor their intelligence really was. Yeah, this map shows the deployment of German forces just prior to this shift. So they would be, and the funny thing is their concentrations are exactly where the Allies landed in 1940.
Right.
Both north and south of Trondheim. So, yeah, just moving on. Rype wasn't the only sabotage group in this area. So there was numerous, or at least 4 groups, and there were others on the way, but which got cancelled. So you'd have Lapwing further south outside this map, and you have Cotton to the north. They also had their base on the Swedish side, so they had to ski through, and they probably had the most difficult terrain to negotiate because and the longest way, but they had very much help from Swedish officials, and this is kind of a recurring theme throughout these operations, that local sheriffs and rangers on the Swedish side was very helpful as guides and as scouts for the Norwegian sabotage groups. You would have Vaxwing south of them, and they were drawn from the Norwegian Brigade in Scotland. And they had a company of paratroopers. So you would have also Woodlark to the south, which will kind of merged with Rype. Many of the Norwegian helpers that Rype relied on came from Woodlark. And of course, Rype and Woodlark also kind of fill the same space in many ways. And this actually, in special operations terms, are quite crowded because, you have at certain points, terrain is kind of gives a certain there are only that many mountain passes, so everybody's going through them. So at some point you would have a courier from one group stumbling across the base of another, and so on. And flying missions, supply missions for these guys would be carpetbaggers from based mainly at Harrington. And supplying these guys from the air was very difficult because, at least because of the sheer distance. And the kind of the dilemma was that if you're going to fly into enemy territory this far north, you preferably would not do it in summer, because then it would be daylight all through the day. So then you would go in at winter, but then of course the weather is difficult, and as you see, these areas lies kind of at the foothills of the border mountains. So Here you have moist air coming in from the North Atlantic, meeting the cold from the cold mountain air, and then you have a lot of precipitation and storms, and the weather is highly unpredictable. So I will get back to that topic later.
Thank you.
So this is the kind of the original plan to where they were going to insert themselves and where they were going to operate. So as you may notice, this is much further north than originally intended. So everything they had of intelligence, all the analysis of the terrain, the enemy forces, the targets would be in that area. So and that's between Grong and just north of Grong. And in this area, there's a lot of tunnels going into mountain sides where you have a sheer drop on one side into a river. And the idea was that if you take out one or several of these tunnels, the repair works would be very difficult because they are not accessible from any roads. Yeah. So this is the a kind of a map of how they dropped. So this is the big blue blob down to in the right-hand corner is the Jefsjø, the lake on which they dropped. So they kind of and this seems like a piece of cake, but it's much more difficult than that, because the problem is navigation. So this far north, you would have a deviation on the compass because of the magnetic North Pole.
Of course, yeah.
And it may only be a fraction of a degree. But this is highly unpredictable because during World War II, the position of the magnetic north actually shifted during the war, just through those 5 years. And imagine that if you are on the ground, you move at a certain pace and it doesn't make much difference. But if you're flying at 300-400 miles per hour, just being a fraction of a degree, of course, means that you are in distance miles from where you were supposed to be. And normally they would navigate by recognizing rivers, lakes, railway, roads. But in Norway in winter, everything is white. So and the contours of the terrain is completely wiped out. And that adds to the problem. So there was a reconnaissance of the area. So as I mentioned, initially they had planned to land much further north, but the reconnaissance party was almost ambushed by the Germans. So they kind of and the reason why they shifted to Jefsjø was that they kind of figured out that the Germans were onto them. So it was kind of a last-ditch switch of area of insertion, and that's why they basically had no information on the area, and they hadn't picked any targets in that area even. But they relied very heavily on Norwegian aids. First and foremost, a guy called Herbert Helgesen, which had been part of Woodlark, which is a whole podcast in itself. So he was funny story. He was arrested for having arrested a Swedish policeman that stumbled upon their base. So he was deported back to deported back to Britain, and that's why he was able to join Operation Rype. And there was also a Norwegian reception team coming up from Stockholm, led by a guy named O.S.S, which is a legend in the Norwegian resistance in the area, and a woman called Tale Pryds. She's an interesting character because because this has been an issue in Norway in the later in the last couple of years, because there's an ongoing question: where are the women of the resistance? The short answer is they were never mentioned in the reports because they did typical women stuff. So they were kind of a victim of the gender roles of the time. But Tale Pryds, she when she was offered to tag along, she had to be on a leave because she weren't allowed to be there officially. So she was on a holiday going into occupied Norway. So we have a picture of her, which is, and her own testimony given after the war, which is the only kind of evidence that she was ever there, because she's not mentioned in the official report.
Can I ask you a quick question? Yeah. Well, we had Dr. Kate Vigers on a few weeks ago talking about her book on the S.O.E in Europe, and the problem across Europe, the S.O.E and O.S.S, is how much you can trust the ground network, because they're being broken by the Germans. Escape lines are getting stopped by Gestapo and things like that. So, particular problems in France and Belgium, Yugoslavia had its issues. Was Norway beset by that kind of problems? I don't think as much as some of the other countries, but by 45, were there in German intelligence operators kind of breaking into Norwegian resistance units and things like that?
Not Germans, but actually Norwegians. So the Germans
collaborating Norwegians,
yeah. So they were completely reliant on Norwegian collaborators, in order to be able to infiltrate Norwegian resistance. So they used something called there's not an established British term, I think, but it's called in Germany the negative Spiel, in which they recruited people believing that they were working for the resistance, being tasked with getting in touch with other resistance groups and then reporting back, not realizing that they were reporting to Norwegian collaborators.
Right, okay.
And there was a guy, I have a picture at the end, called Rinnan, which was active in this area. So in central Norway particularly, the Norwegian resistance had a real hard time. So they were they were completely reliant on British leadership, because you never knew who you were going to trust. And if you look at the networks, they were the resistance networks. They were comprised mainly of people who knew each other from before the war.
Right.
So, for instance, sports clubs were very kind of the backbone of the Norwegian resistance, at least in this area. So the B-24s came in across, flew across the coast into Sweden, turned around and came up from the south. So you'd have, and it's this complicated story really, because when they take off from Harrington, they go to Scotland, and there's a malfunction with the engines of one of the aircraft, so they switch crews, and one of them stay behind, and there's a total of 8 aircraft starting the run, and only 4 are able to drop. One of them drops into Sweden, which I will return to. And at the same time, they are dropping supplies, which of course is scattered all over the place. And because of all this switching, they don't know exactly what equipment is being dropped. So they go looking for things that doesn't exist, basically. And so this area is, it's the surface of the lake is around 500 meters above sea level. It kind of gives you an idea about the terrain, climate. So it's dry, and winter is going to be there for a long time. So they settled at a small mountain farm called the S.O.E, which is one of 4 mountain farms in this area, which of course is far between. And they kind of they become the guests of a small family living there. It's a couple with a 9-year-old son, and they become they are evacuated to Sweden over the course of a couple of days, and they install themselves into the farm buildings themselves. And there's a whole story about this in the aftermath, because to make a long story short, the main building of this farm was recently restored and is now a museum, and it's kind of a hotspot for adventure tourism. And absolutely recommended this place to visit.
Brilliant.
Although it has no road connection. So the easiest way to get there is to drive to the Swedish side and take a boat or ski across the lake in wintertime.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. And another comment about these maps I'm showing you, you may notice the grid system. And that is invaluable doing research to have these contemporary maps, because the places in the reports refers to these maps. So sometimes you just have a grid reference, and you need to have the exact map to know what place are they talking about. And these maps are made by the War Office, the British War Office, in 1941, 1942, based on Norwegian maps. These are some items in our collection being dropped to Rype. Of course, the rations. And this is some of the equipment. You would have the famous parka. Below you have the Springfield rifle. In the center you have the cold mask they used when dropping into the mountains in winter, because it's like being slapped in the face with a lump of ice. There's a compass related to it, and we also have the submachine gun on the right in our displays. That's it's called a Marlin, made by United Defense. It kind of looks very remotely like a Thompson, but it's not. So this is to show you this group that dropped into Sweden. So there were 5 of them, led by Sergeant Leif Eystad, which is the guy on the right on the picture. The guy on the left is Sivert Wind, a Swedish American, which is almost Norwegian American, so I guess that qualifies. So they were 66 kilometers, of course, and dropped on a lake called Landåsjön. There's some conflicting testimonies from the NORSO guys and from the pilots, because to to make a long story short, the pilots probably knew that they were off course, but if they were going to get back to Britain, they would have to drop the extra weight. So, according to the pilots, O.S.S and the guys were okay with that, while O.S.S and the guys denied that. So they landed on Lindgjerdet, and they were apprehended by Swedish police and led to captivity. And they were released and returned to service, which is a testimony to how far on the Allied side the Swedish had got on this at this point in the war. The intelligence they had was quite extensive, I must say, because British intelligence had started to map any possible targets, every bridge, every tunnel over a certain size, all through the Norwegian Railway network. So these were published in or printed in by something called the Inter-Service Topographical Department, and it contains of descriptions of railway bridges. For instance, this one, which was their prime target, which they never reached. But if you look at the construction, you kind of figure out why, because it's a very complex structure, which would have required a lot of resources to repair. But also, it's quite a challenge to blow up, because it would take a lot of climbing, a lot of people. You need to secure a large area, which kind of saved the bridge twice, because they were also the target of the Woodlark group, which kind of figured that no, this is not a good target, however tempting it is. And this is kind of also an example of the details they would have on this construction. You can see the schematics of the bridge, and this would have they would have this of any bridge over something like 10 meters. Yeah. And this is kind of gives you an impression of the topography, the landscape around in this area. And what's kind of interesting to notice is that if you travel through this area today, there's a lot more, much denser wood forest. So and that's partially because of climate, but also because of animal husbandry, because the animals would chew up all the vegetation. And of course, it's war, and people would also chop wood far more extensively. But this gives you this illustration is to show how inaccurate the maps they used are. So it may be a bit difficult to figure out without me being able to point, but you see the lines here, and you see the red lines. The dotted line, the red square with the dotted line, shows you the location of this Grana Bridge on the maps they had. The not dotted red square shows you where the bridge really is, and the whole angle of how the railway travels through the terrain is completely off. And this was discovered during their planning of this operation. So the Norwegians kind of didn't take notice because they knew very well where the bridge was. So Major Colby, the commanding officer of this operation, he just suddenly discovered, hey, this bridge is just not there. So of course it isn't. Yes. Yeah. we probably should introduce some of the main characters in this operation, because as a modern historian, you kind of skip the personality issues, but you kind of deal with people in categories. But any good narrative has an emphasis on characters, and of course the book I wrote does have that. But so you would have a Major William Colby, who is of not Norwegian heritage at all, but he has kind of grown up with Norwegians, know their culture very well, and he has learned to ski in college, and he's kind of a typical O.S.S. operator, because he's just as much an intellectual as he is a military. So there's some military traditions in his family. His father was an officer, or even was an officer also during the war. So he's trained as a lawyer, which many of these O.S.S. guys were. And he had been part of the law firm of William Colby, the founder of the O.S.S. So that was kind of his way into this. Another guy that I have already mentioned was their main Norwegian helper, which was a native of Trondheim. His name was Herbert Helgesen, a butcher by trade. And he was kind of part of this LARC network originally, which was the S.O.E sponsored resistance group in the Trondheim area, tasked with training Norwegian resistance. Another guy that I may mention was a guy called Farnsworth. Sorry, he was their demolitions expert, and he was handpicked for his demolition skills, not for his skills as a skier. And it kind of you can read between the line that he was a kind of a drag, so to say, so they had to kind of pull him along, and he had only learned to ski a year before the operation, so you can imagine he was not very up to it. Øystein I had already mentioned. He was a sailor, being stranded in the United States. That's how he got into NORSO. You would also have a guy called Tom Sæther, who was from Tromsø, born and raised in Tromsø. And both these guys were they were accomplished skier, having competed before the war. You would also have a Norwegian courier named Kjell Sørli, the brother of the resistance leader Odd. He was their scout and courier, being tasked with getting longer reports over to Sweden. Otherwise, they were completely reliant on radio telegraph, Morse, which of course also was challenging in this mountainous area, because there was all kind of atmospheric conditions interfering with the transmissions. And the radio operator was a guy named Langeland. He was also a sailor and telegraph operator in the Norwegian Merchant Navy before the war, so he was quite skilled. And there was another one, Norwegian, called Hans Leirmo, a native of this area. So he knew this area as the back of his hand, because he had been an orphan and he had worked as a shepherd in this area from the age of 7. And he was and he was in his early 40s, but he was the best skier among them all. So he was literally trailblazing, making the trip easier for everybody else. And of course, he knew the area. He knew the best approaches to the targets, how to avoid German lookouts, and so on. And so this was the team. And I may have forgotten somebody that I should have mentioned, but there was a lot of guys. I may also mention a guy named Harald Larsen, because a main issue popping up in military history over the recent years is the issue of trauma, because a lot of these guys, they were experiencing problems after the war, alcoholism, broken homes, and so on. But Harald Larsen is quite a character and so he was interviewed on this topic in his older days, and he said something like, he knew a lot of guys that were struggling, but he thought it was just fun because it was his youth. So he had a lot of fun memories from this. And you may also so their experience varied greatly. Some of these guys had family in Trondheim who may have been subject to torture. A lot of them knew that their girlfriends and wives were being captured by the Germans. And even Helgesen, he was even widowed because his wife was trying to escape and she froze to death on the mountains. So there was a lot of personal tragedy into this also. I'm switching now to their first attack. So they had switched to this area in which they were completely unprepared for. So they had to pour over their maps, pick the targets. As I said, they were planning on attacking Grana Bridge, but found that unsuitable because they were basically understaffed because they were lacking a lot of men. So they settled on quite a modest target, a railway bridge, which was only some 7 to 9 meters long, and it was so small that it wasn't even in the survey material they had. So the map you see now shows you the route they took. So they started out on the 9th of April, which was the anniversary for the German attack on Norway. So as you go from Jefsjø, it's kind of a steep climb the first couple of kilometers because they are actually on the Swedish side of the watershed. But once they reach all these big lakes on the other side of these mountains, it's quite easy going. So, and they reach a cabin which was owned by a guy named Schultz, which had it sounds very German, but he wasn't German, but that was German enough, so they literally trashed the place, drank all the alcohol that was available. Then there was a incident with the cabin almost catching fire, and then they sobered up and figured out they should really be on their way. So they continue westward, then there's some rough going, and then there's some more easy going. And if you notice, there's a place, or I guess that's a bit much to ask, but along the route they had a mountain called Imsdal Mountain. And there's a mountain with the exact same name a bit further north by northwest. And they had the intelligence that there was a German lookout on top of that mountain. which is probably erroneous because the lookout was on the other mountain with the same name.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and they get down to the lowlands, and there's an issue, of course, of the spring thaw, and they get onto all these marshes and lakes, and because what happens in the spring on these lakes is that you will have periods of thaw, and then you have some frost, and you get all these pockets of water and ice mixed in between each other. So there's a high risk of bursting through the top layer of ice. You don't drown, but you get soaked wet, which could be literally fatal in this type of operations. So they progress. I'm not going to take you all through the details, but just looking at this map kind of gives you an idea about the shifting of the terrain, and you can see the lines on how difficult the terrain was in some places. The guy on the right is Kjell Sørli, taking a short break. He was only I think he was 19 at this point, so he was a very, very young guy. So this is the final, or not the final, but he got their approach towards the target. Yeah, well, sorry for this being Norwegian. I made a last-minute change to the.
No worries.
So, and this is probably not from the picture. Is probably not from that operation because the weather at that point was quite humid, a lot of fog. So this is probably from the second operation. So they go, and it's not very easy to read their intentions from their movements, because they send 2 reconnaissance parties to the north to reconnoiter towards the railway much further north. So it's never said in the reports if they had plans to blow up another bridge, which is highly plausible. Another issue was if they were going to try to avoid blowing up the bridge, so causing Norwegian fatalities if a train happened to approach at the same time. Because that was because a lot of these guys, the Norwegian helpers, had taken part in a successful demolition of a much larger bridge on the 13th of January, which caused the 78 fatalities, including some Norwegians, but mainly German soldiers, which is still listed as the biggest railway accident in Norway. Right. And you may imagine that anywhere else in occupied Europe, the saboteurs would have been joyful because of this result, but the Norwegians were actually quite saddened by it, because their mission was to stop Germans from reaching Europe, not to kill them. So they felt actually bad for having killed just random German soldiers, and they also feared reprisals against the local civilians, which didn't happen, but it almost happened, because there were very strong voices within the German authorities in Norway that demanded reprisals against the local community. Yes, so this is the final attack. As you see, it says Tangen Bridge, which is the location of this rather small bridge, and you see all these patrols going in all directions. Yeah. Some of you may also notice the name Hegset, which is quite a common name. This is not where the American Secretary of Defense hails from. It's another place with almost the same name. Yes. Yeah, so this is just a kind of a doctrinal sketch of the enemy troops in the area. So there's the nearest posting is at Valaya station. And there's also a lot of activities by Soviet POWs use chopping wood in the area. So there's a lot of activity, not necessarily a threat towards the party, but it's not something you want to encounter. So this is how they blew it up. So they would approach the target, place a group for security on either end, and they would go into because of course the bridge is across a small creek, and you would have to sneak through the ravine to the and being down there, you don't have much overview of the area around it. So they used a standard fuse, not these time pencils you can see to the right, and they and another curious thing about the reports is that they used 40 kilograms of explosives, which is quite excessive for a target like this. So that also kind of feeds the idea that maybe they were also looking for other targets, but they used all the explosives on this minor target, probably because they didn't bother to carry it back up to the base. And so the bridge here, you have two girders with overlays, and one of the girders simply just flew off. And it landed in, it flew right through the window of a cabin some 100 meters away. So it was quite fast.
Well, yeah, that amount of explosives would probably do that. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of bang. Yeah.
Yeah. So, typical American excessive use of force. And this is a contemporary photograph, or not contemporary, but taken reasonably soon after the war. And the problem with photographing such objects, it's of course the vegetation, because I think they have cleared it quite recently, but has been completely overgrown and impossible to see from the main highway, which is from where this photograph has been taken.
Right.
Yes. So the return trip was quite eventful, so to say. So they returned to where you say it's listed Øyvingen, which is the lake where they had their forward base of operation. And not to their knowledge, they were pursued by a German patrol of 6 men. In the evening of the second day, they were stopping to rest at a there's no standard English equivalent, but in Scots you have the term shealing, which is a mountain summer farm, small summer farm. So that's where they were heading, and arriving at this summer farm, they run into one of the reconnaissance groups that were rendezvousing with them at that point, and they had spotted another enemy patrol approaching from the south. And this led to a race. We don't know if the Germans ever spotted them, but they were, at least the NORSO guys were convinced that they were in hot pursuit. So for the final lap across the mountains leading up to the border, they had to ascend a steep hill. And they were totally exhausted. They hadn't slept, and they were, deprived of their long-awaited rest. So they broke out something called benzedrine, which is light amphetamine, in order to be able to kind of to make a final effort. So they managed to get up on a mountain plateau, and then they were into Sweden. And for those who have very good eyesight, you probably see some pencil marks on this map, which is basically running parallel with the arrows. And that's we don't know exactly, not for sure, the origin, but this map is from our archives, and it suggested that this is actually the map used for planning the operation. So that's the marks of the guys taking part in this operation, but we're not 100% sure.
Right.
So, and this is the second operation. So then now they're going after the rails themselves. So they start the operation on April the 23rd, and this is much easier going because they stick to the mountains in high altitude, because the temperatures are lower. The thaw hasn't come that far, at least until they make their final approach. And if you notice that they take quite a long way around a mountain, huge mountain, in order to keep to the north face of the mountains, probably in order to be assured that the going is it's optimal. Because as I mentioned, Hans Leirmo, he probably suggested this not by accident. He knew where what marshes would be open, what rivers not to cross, and so on. And this quite idyllic picture is from this operation. And in Norway, we have a tradition called påsketur, Eastern trip, which is basically a family event where we choose to live as refugees in the mountains for a week. And this is pretty much a similar scenario. And it's also mentioned in some of the reports by the Norwegian. It's almost as a Eastern trip when everything worked well and the going was good. So, and as you can see, it's quite a distance. So they reach the forward operations base on the third day. So this is a doctrinal sketch of how they attacked. So the black line running on the left-hand side of this map is the railway. So they approached through call it a gully or a gorge, and they fanned out in groups. So they had divided up the explosives into the minimum you would need to blow up the railway. So, and I have discussed this with people with contemporary training in railway sabotage, and their approach might have been a bit different. So what these guys were doing was putting the charges on the fish plates. I don't know how common that term is in English, but
yeah, we use that. Yeah,
between the rails. So they placed the explosive on every second joint in order to maximize the damage for the amount of explosives they had. So each group was assigned a certain stretch of railway, a couple of 100 meters. And the total length of the target was 2.5 kilometers. And as you can see, retreating from this attack would be some challenging, especially in the north, because you would have to go parallel with the railway for at least a couple of 100 yards, or you would have to negotiate quite a steep mountainside to the east. And as you can see by the red squares, there were some guards along this stretch of railway all the way. So you would have, especially Major Colby's group was very exposed, because there was a railway tunnel that they were going to attack, and there was a guard just next to it. So the plan was that everybody would, and they would have to synchronize this, so they would reach the target simultaneously, which was quite challenging because they had to follow different route, and they had different distances to their target. The problem for Major Colby was that they were attacking a railway, and there was the tunnel, and they were there, and they suddenly discovered there's a guard. And they placed they managed to place the charges not in the tunnel, but not far from it. And the signal for setting off the charges was a flare. But then suddenly the German guard sent up a flare, meaning that they were being detected. So Colby decided not to send up a flare, so they had a contingency plan to set off the charges just before midnight, if there wasn't any flare to be seen, meaning that Colby had run into trouble. So they and the way they did it was they used these kind of time pencils that and quite technically, but inside this is this pencil is a copper thread. And when broken, there's a capsule with acid that that kind of eats through the copper at a certain speed. So the typical setting would be 10 seconds. And when that 10 seconds were up, the thread was cut, and there would be a kind of a firing pin hitting a firing cap, setting off the explosive. Other operations would have problems when in extreme cold temperature, the acid wouldn't work as quickly as intended, so there would be delays. But this happened in quite in temperatures around 0 degrees. So each party would run along the railway, setting off the charges, and there would be almost like sounding like an air attack, because there were a lot of explosions in succession all along the railway. And they fled to and they retreated, and they reached back to their forward operations space. And the last party group arriving shouted, "There's Germans on our heels!" And the first ones to arrive had started brewing coffee. But that was not going to happen. So everybody put on their skis and fled about the same way as they had arrived. And they strung strings of metal along the route and put up booby traps. And we know that at least one German was killed, and another one had his foot cut off by the knee by the explosions.
A couple of questions for you just before we move on. The Germans pursuing, are they going to be on skis, Ian is asking, or are they on foot?
Yeah, they're on skis, because there's about 3 or 4 feet with snow, and you wouldn't get very far without skis. Okay. But then again, their skiing abilities would have been very. It would vary, but some of them may have been good skiers, but generally not.
Okay, and Sean asked, what knowledge the O.S.S teams have of the railway schedules. I mean, you don't want to be setting charges when suddenly a train arrives. I'm assuming they're not busy train railways like in, I don't know, central Oslo or something.
No, because the main traffic on these tracks are not public. They are military transports. We didn't abide by any timetables at all. But that's probably why they would send reconnaissance party out in order to have some kind of early warning.
Okay, thank you. Back to you.
Yeah. And also you have some pictures to our right, which seems, I don't know if this resonates with the rest of the world, but to a Norwegian, this looks quite idyllic. Guys having fun in the snow, skiing. Yes. Yes. So they only managed these two attacks. So that's basically it. So and which is quite modest result in pure for all practical terms. But there was still a couple of weeks left of the war, and they would have some challenges because their main worry was that if the war kept on as long as the snow managed to be gone, because at the time there was the thaw was peaking, and all the rivers and lakes and marshes were completely impossible. So for the time being they were quite safe, but also they couldn't get anywhere if they had to move, or at least they could only move with quite some difficulties. So they kind of came up with a plan to make a last stand. And if you notice the map to the right, there's this bulge that I mentioned on Norway sticking jutting into Sweden, and there's a lot of lakes, and in the northernmost corner of this area, there Colby planned to kind of fortify, because there were only very few areas where the Germans could pass through, and they also counted on mobilizing local Norwegians and getting joint forces with all these other groups that were in the area. So when they telegraphed this to London, there was complete silence. So they were quite puzzled by this. So they requested supplies, additional weapons, mortars, and still silence. And when they suggested to go ahead, they just get a sharp reply: "Don't move, don't do anything." And the London wasn't ready to discuss it. And only later did they learn that the reason why this is that there was running these operations was a joint U.S.-British command called Special Operations Headquarters, and the radio operators in this command was British young girls mainly, meaning that any plan or any suggestion message from Rype to their American superiors would also be picked up by the British.
Right.
Seizing territory and holding it would be a no-go for the British. So that's why the Americans in London simply just chose to ignore this plan, because it would run counter to what they had agreed upon with the British. And it might sound quite ludicrous thing to do, and they had some concerns because there's talk about vacours. If my French is not um, uh, completely off, there was a town or a village called Vercours in France, which was there was a Jedburgh operation nearby, and the local resistance thought they were being liberated, and they rose up and attacked the Germans in the nearby area, leading to reprisals. So this was one of the major concerns of Rype also, that if they crossed the line, the Norwegian civilians would be victim. They would also have problems getting supplies in, because this they had chosen to stop flying these carpetbagger missions, and any supplies reaching them would have to come through Sweden, which would be all but impossible at this point because of the spring thaw. And also they had some medical issues, and this because winter warfare has its particular problems. For instance, if you're going to have drinking water, you would have to thaw snow, and you would have to so getting water to not only drinking but personal hygiene and so on would be an issue. And we have at least one instance where they drank water that they shouldn't have drank. And there was also a guy eating snow, resulting in stomach cramps because of the shock to the intestines. And the symptoms of this is quite similar to appendicitis. So he was hushed off to Sweden and hospital, fearing that he may die because of appendicitis. But it was false alarm. Another thing happened in the last weeks of the war was a sudden rush of Norwegian helpers. So they were at some points there were about 30 something of these Norwegians flocking to the area because of German raids in the nearby communities, which of course was a security problem because they didn't have they couldn't run background checks and and another incident which is quite controversial is the German patrol that stumbled upon their base on the 2nd of May, which and there's several conflicting versions on what happened. So the official reason is that they were listening in on the radio. Listening into the news, and they were kind of letting their guard down. So a German patrol were able to surprise them. And the guy standing watch turned around, and there was a kind of a Mexican standoff. And he said that this cabin this house is full of Americans, and if you try to do something, you're bound to be defeated. And it seems like the Germans were standing down, but then one of the Germans fired off a shot, either intentionally or by accident, most probably the last. And by that time, the Americans had emerged and were pointing at the Germans with their guns. And from a military point of view, if because they were standing only feet apart, and from a military point of view, if the enemy is saying that he's surrendering but fire off a shot, you act on instinct. And so the Germans were killed in the ensuing firefight, which happened, of course, at point blank range. But it has since emerged some other versions. That the shot was fired is unquestionable, but that some have suggested that the situation was diffused and then the Germans were executed later, which of course would have been a war crime.
Yeah.
But that's I mean, there's the only evidence, as far as I have managed to figure out, is the testimony of one of the Norwegians, because as the shot went off, a Norwegian was standing in the doorway and he was shot in the stomach, and or at least in the abdomen, and he was dragged in, probably in shock, while this ensuing fire, or at least whatever happened next, he would not have been in any state of getting a clear picture of what would happen. But as an eyewitness of sort, he has been or had been was questioned by journalists and local historians for decades until they've got the version that they were looking for, namely that the Germans were executed. So I'm, as a historian, you have to take different sources, different possible course of actions into account. But my bet is that they were killed in the confusion following the first shot, because I think it's highly unlikely that they would have been that any surrender would have been accepted after that happened, because as I said,
good point. Yeah.
And after that, there was a strong fear that the Germans would send further patrols looking for the guys that didn't return. So in the final days before the Germans surrendered, they crossed the border just to be on the safe side, taking up. So there was some cabins just across the lake. And there they sat until 8th of May, when they returned to the farm, knowing that the war was over. And then a very peculiar situation occurred, because they were what Colby and the men were wanting was to get down from the mountains, take part in the celebrations, but they were refused for reasons unknown. Probably the British didn't want the Americans to be the first liberators that the Norwegians would see. But finally, on the 11th of May, they were allowed down to the local villages, citing lack of food. They were claiming to be starving. So they were let down into the villages, and they were, of course, hailed as heroes, because they were, and the main success of this mission is PR, sheer PR, because these Americans, the American uniforms would be what these people associated with peace and victory. So I have some pictures at the end here. We can go through if you think we have time.
Yeah, this is all great stuff. We're enjoying it.
So these are two of these collaborators that I was talking about. The guy on the left is this Rinnan guy, which was a master of this play of this negative spiel, and he was a torturer and a murderer. And there's when people do such things, there's always a discussion of what makes these people murderers and torturists. So and there's been a lot of conflicting testimonies. Some suggest that he was very short, and he was dark haired, had dark eyes. So some have suggested that he wanted to get back at bullies and kind of so he was basically a narcissist. Finally, with the Germans finding somebody who appreciated his talents. So this is another picture from, we think it's from Levanger, from the victory parade, so to say. So the guys standing to the left are Norwegians. You would have a guy called Jon Moan, a local Norwegian veteran of the 1940 campaign, and you would have next to him S.O.E again, and then the Americans of this party. And of course, you see civilians standing in the background. This is from Namsos, because when they arrived at Trondheim, the operation, the NORSO guys, they were billeted in a hotel, having a good time, took part in some parades that we are going to look into, and then the British wanted them out. And the pretext was that the Germans are acting up at Namsos. You have to go up there and is the situation. They were not very happy with that. You can see they're quite in a bad mood. This is from to show you a bit the challenges we have as historians. So this is a picture from one of the parades. So there was a parade on the 17th of May, which is the national holiday of Norway, and there was a parade on the 10th of June when the Crown Prince came visiting. So we have this picture, and we have this picture. So which is from what event? So literally the same guys. The guy in the center carrying the flag is I forgot his name, but it's the same guy as carrying the flag on this picture, and it's literally from the same street corner. But if you look at the trees, you see the leaf on the trees on the first picture, they are only beginning to bloom. And on the second picture, they are fully emerged. So from that, we know that the first picture is from the 17th of May, and the second picture is from the 10th of June. And you can also see further details, for instance, how they're carrying their weapons. Slung over the shoulder and presenting arms. And so when we see other pictures in which we cannot see the foliage, we know by the way they are holding their guns which event it is. So that's history research for you. So they were very eager to have their picture taken. So they went to the photographer of the studio in Trondheim, Studio Schröder, and they were you can imagine. Also, they took hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and has done it all through the history of this city. And also in May and June 1945, they took a lot of pictures. So we have from the same parade, we have pictures for every meter. So these are the chums of this operation. Colby on our to our left, and Helgesen to our right. And you may also notice that Helgesen is wearing an American uniform, whereas most of the other Norwegians wore British uniforms because they were under British command, not American command. But some have suggested that Helgesen did that because of a fallout with his superiors. So this is a group photo also by the same studio of the group that performed in Operation Rype. So there's a much larger group also, which also includes NORSO 2, which was a follow-up force sent in after the German surrender. But this is the guys that took part in the actual operation. So you can see all the people carrying berets. They are Norwegians, and also we have There's a couple of Swedes, and also a he's not in the picture. He was a half Norwegian Swedish guy who decided to join in also. Yeah, I guess that was the last of my slides.
That comment about this, about the guy who just decided to join in, I think that is so typical of these sorts of operations. In that, is this resistance? Is it O.S.S? Is it U.S. Army? Is it British Army? Is it with? It's a bit of all of the above, isn't it? It's just anyone who kind of wants to join in, sort of joins in, and many uniform regulations go out the window.
Yeah, and many of these guys, they were born in Norway. Yeah. So, for instance, Øystad and Sater and all these guys, so they could have just as well have ended up in Britain, serving in the British Army, and then they would probably have returned to Norway. But as they went to the US, they remained there and later got US citizenship. Yes.
So, well, that's brilliant presentation. We've got a couple of questions. Going back to the railway, Ian T wanted to know, was the railway single or double track?
Double track is hardly in the Norwegian vocabulary.
Right, okay.
so no, they were single tracks. So you'd only have double tracks near major marshalling yards and stations. Yes.
And the other thing I'm going to ask, and this is a potentially massive, great rabbit hole, and it's for you as a historian, but also for the museum as well, is one of the recurring questions we have on this channel is how you measure the success of some of these special operations, because some of them have a propaganda impact that's far beyond the strategic impact. Some of them set precedents in how things would be done in the future. I'm thinking of things like the Chindits in Burma, which sort of set up long-range patrolling in Vietnam 30 years later. So as a Norwegian historian, maybe not just looking at this operation, but some of the earlier ones, Telemark, Vemork, is it always necessary to look at an actual impact of these missions, or are they just worth studying because they're interesting?
I think the latter, because some of them had a huge impact on the course of the war beyond their the effort made by the men, for instance, the heavy water attack, but also there's Rype especially, it was not intended as a propaganda effort, but it kind of turned out that way, and that was mainly because you have to take into account that this operation was originally planned immediately following the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah.
So they were kind of thinking that the war would drag on maybe for months.
Well, that's the point I was going to make, because it's that reminder that historians must also always consider that there is no knowledge of the future when something's happening. We're seeing that as you got through this, it started off March, then it became late April, then it became the end of April. We're all thinking, but Hitler's dead now. The war is nearly over. But Colby didn't know it then. They didn't know when the questions came in earlier about what were the German reprisals. It all happened so close to the end of the war that wasn't an effect of it. But who knows what might have happened? What if things had got drawn out in Germany? What if the Russians had got delayed attacking Berlin? What if the weather had changed? Who knows what would have happened over the next few weeks? And the impact of this would have been very different. The final question from the audience is obviously the museum and your book has helped, but how much do the people of Norway know about this particular operation? I mean, obviously the heavy water plant is probably the famous story that most Norwegians and indeed most Brits and Americans watching this would know about, that mostly because of Kirk Douglas and Richard Harris in the movie. But how much of this operation will be known by your average Norwegian student of World War II, and are there memorials out there in this area?
Oh, there are memorials. There's two. First, there's the memorial by the Jørstad Bridge, which is the bridge
Yeah.
blown up by Goodlark, which also includes some mentioning of Rype. You would also have a memorial at the top of the Plukkerkjenn mountain, which was the site of the crash on the 6th of April. We could have talked about those also, but and there's also a memorial at the military base at Værnes. And because locally or regionally, this operation is quite well known, not at least because of some of the controversies, and and once you put the CIA into the equation, you get all kinds of conspiracies. And another factor that has brought this operation to the forefront is the cooperation with the United States militarily, because central Norway is kind of the focal point of American assistance to Norway in case of a war. So there's every year there's a also a kind of an exchange exercise between the local Home Guard and the National Guard of Minnesota. And every time Norwegian and American militaries meet in some capacity, there's always a mention of Operation Rype, because it has kind of become a common ground, a common reference point for Norwegian-American cooperation.
I mean, that's another subject for another day. But I'm thinking of as a Brit, there's still those connections between British commandos and Norwegian commandos. But as you say there, this important relationship between the beginning of American Special Forces, Norwegian Special Forces, kind of mountain warfare generally, and it's beyond the subject of this discussion, but it was good for William Colby's CV later on in his career. People respect a proper hardcore military operation. If he had just been behind the desk in World War II, well, people will respect that to some extent. But when you start saying, jumping out over occupied Norway and going up and blowing up, it gives a certain amount of credibility. And some of these people's post-war careers were heavily affected by what they've been doing in World War II. Well, we will end things to this. It's been a fantastic conversation to you. So, folks, the link to the book is in the description below. You can buy an English language version of it, US and UK. I've also put the link into the museum that Frode works at, so you can check that out. But in the meantime, I'm going to say thank you, everybody, for your fantastic questions. Priyat Buttar is back tomorrow for the second part of his Operation Bagration presentation about his latest book, and then there's more stuff coming out your way. Click, like, and subscribe. Buy my guest books. Visit their websites. But for the meantime, this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Cheers, everybody. Thanks. Bye.